When a crowd of thousands upon thousands had gathered so that they were crushing each other, Jesus began to speak first to his disciples. Watch out for the Pharisees. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees. I mean the mismatch between their hearts and lives. Nothing is hidden that won't be revealed, and nothing is secret that won't be made known and brought out into the light. Therefore, whatever you have said in the darkness will be heard in the light. And whatever you have whispered in the rooms deep inside the house will be announced from the rooftops. Therefore, I tell you, don't be terrified by those who... I tell you, my friends, don't be terrified by those who can kill the body, but after that can do nothing more. I'll show you whom you should fear. Fear the one who, after you have been killed, has the authority to throw you into hell. Yes, I'm telling you, that's the one you should fear. Aren't 5 sparrows sold for 2 small coins? Yet not one of them is overlooked by God. Even the hairs on your head are all counted. Don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. I tell you, whoever acknowledges me before humans, the human one will acknowledge before God's angels. Whoever rejects me before others will be rejected before God's angels. Anyone who speaks a word against the human one will be forgiven, but whoever insults the Holy Spirit won't be forgiven. When they bring you before the synagogues, rulers, and authorities, don't worry about how to defend yourselves or what you should say. The Holy Spirit will tell you at that very moment what you must say. Someone from the crowd spoke up, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus said to him, "Man, who appointed me as judge or referee between you and your brother?" Then Jesus said to them, "Watch out, guard yourself against all kinds of greed. After all, one's life isn't determined by one's possessions, even when someone is very rich." Jesus told them a parable. A certain rich man's land produced a bountiful crop. He said to himself, "What will I do? I have no place to store my harvest." Then he thought, "Here's what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. That's where I'll store all my grain and goods. I'll say to myself, you have stored up plenty of goods, enough for several years. Take it easy, eat, drink, and enjoy yourself." But God said to him, "Fool, tonight you will die. Now who will get the things you have prepared for yourself? This is the way it will be for those who hoard things for themselves but aren't rich toward God." Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, don't worry about what your life, what you'll eat, or about your body, what you'll wear. There is more to life than food, and more to the body than clothing." Notice how, consider the ravens. They neither plant nor harvest. They have no silo or barn, yet God feeds them. You are worth so much more than birds. Who among you, by worrying, can add a single moment to your life? If you can't do such a small thing, why worry about the rest? Notice how the lilies grow. They don't wear themselves out with work, and they don't spin cloth. But I say to you that even Solomon in all his splendor wasn't dressed like one of these. If God dresses grass in the field so beautifully, even though it's alive today and tomorrow it's thrown into the furnace, how much more will God do for you, you people of weak faith? Don't chase after what you will eat or what you will drink. Stop worrying. All the nations of the world long for these things. Your Father knows that you need them. Instead, desire his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. Don't be afraid, little flock, because your Father delights in giving you the kingdom. Make for yourselves sell your possessions and give to those in need. Make for yourselves wallets that don't wear out, a treasure in heaven that never runs out. No thief comes near there, and no moth destroys. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be too. Be dressed for service and keep your lamps lit. Be like people waiting for their master to come home from a wedding celebration, who can immediately open the door for him when he arrives and knocks on the door. I assure you, happy are those servants whom the master finds waiting up when he arrives. I assure you that when he arrives, he will dress himself to serve, seat them at the table as honored guests, and wait on them. Happy are those whom the master finds. Happy are those whom he finds alert, even if he comes at midnight or just before dawn. But know this: if the homeowner had known what time the thief was coming, he wouldn't have allowed his home to be broken into. You also must be alert, because the human one is coming at a time when you don't expect him. Peter said, Master, are you telling this parable for us or for everyone? The Lord replied, who are the faithful and wise managers whom the master will put in charge of his household possessions, whom the master will put in charge of his household servants to give them their food at the proper time? Happy are those servants whom the master finds fulfilling their responsibilities when he comes. But suppose that, I assure you that the master will put him in charge of all his possessions, but suppose that these servants should say to themselves, my master is taking his time about coming. And suppose they began to beat the servants, both men and women, and to eat, drink, and get drunk. The master of those servants will come at a time they weren't expecting him. On a day they weren't expecting him, at a time they couldn't predict. The master will cut them into pieces and assign them a place with the unfaithful. That servant who knew his master's will but didn't prepare for it or act on it will be beaten severely. The one who didn't know the master's will but did things deserving punishment will be beaten only a little. Much will be demanded from everyone who has been given much, and from the one who has been entrusted with much, even more will be asked. I came to cast fire on the earth. I came to cast fire on the earth. I came to cast fire on the earth. How I wish that it was already ablaze. I have a baptism I must experience. How I'm distressed until it's completed. Do you think that I have come to bring peace to the earth? No, I tell you, I have come instead to bring division. From now on, a household of 5 will be divided. 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. Father will square off against son, and son against father. Mother against daughter, and daughter against mother. And mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. Jesus also said to the crowds, when you see a cloud forming in the west, you immediately say, it's going to rain. And indeed it does. And when a south wind blows, you say, a heat wave is coming, and it does. Hypocrites! You know how to interpret conditions on earth and in the sky. How is it that you don't know how to interpret the present time? And why don't you judge for yourselves what is right? As you're going to court with your accuser, make your best effort to reach a settlement along the way. Otherwise, your accuser may bring you before the judge, and the judge hand you over to the officer, and the officer throw you into prison. I assure you that you won't get out of there until you've paid the very last cent. Some who were present on that occasion told Jesus about the Galileans whom Pilate had killed while they were offering sacrifices. He replied, do you think the suffering of these Galileans proves that they were more sinful than all the other Galileans? No, I tell you, but unless you change your hearts and lives, you'll die just as they did. And what about those 12 people who were killed when the Tower of Siloam fell on them? Do you think that they were more guilty of wrongdoing than everyone else who lives in Jerusalem? No, I tell you, but unless you change your hearts and lives, you will die just as they did. Jesus told them a parable. A certain man owned a fig tree planted in a vineyard. He came looking for fruit on it and found none. He said to his gardener, look, I've come looking for fruit on this fig tree for the past 3 years, and I've never found any. Cut it down. Why should it continue depleting the soil's nutrients? The gardener responded, Lord, give it 1 more year, and I'll dig around it and give it fertilizer. Maybe it'll produce fruit next year. If not, then you can cut it down. Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. A woman was there who had been disabled by an unclean spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and couldn't stand up straight. When he saw her, the Lord had compassion for her and said, when he saw her, Jesus called her to him and said, "Woman, you are set free from your sickness." He placed his hands on her and she straightened up at once and praised God. The synagogue leader, incensed that Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, said, "There are 6 days during which work is permitted. Come and be healed on those days, not on the Sabbath day." Jesus replied, the Lord replied, "Hypocrites, suppose your child or ox fell into a ditch on the Sabbath day. Now, hypocrites, won't each of you on the Sabbath untie your ox or donkey from its stall and lead it out to get a drink? Then isn't it necessary that this woman, a daughter of Abraham, bound by Satan for 18 long years, be set free from her bondage on the Sabbath day?" When he said these things, all his opponents were put to shame, but all those in the crowd rejoiced at all the extraordinary things he was doing. Jesus asked, "What is God's kingdom like? To what can I compare it? It's like a mustard seed that someone took and planted in a garden. It grew and developed into a tree, and the birds in the sky nested in its branches." Again he asked, "To what can I compare God's kingdom? It's like yeast, which a woman took and hid in a bushel of wheat flour until the yeast worked its way through the hole." Jesus continued. Jesus traveled through cities and villages, teaching and making his way to Jerusalem. Someone said to him, "Lord, will only a few be saved?" Jesus said to them, "Make every effort to enter through the narrow gate. Many, I tell you, will try to enter and won't be able to. Once the owner of the house gets up and shuts the door, then you will stand outside and knock on the door, saying, 'Lord, open the door for us.' He will reply, 'I don't know you or where you are from.' You will begin to say, 'We ate and drank in your presence, and you taught in our streets.' He will reply, 'I don't know you or where you are from. Go away from me, all you evildoers.' There will be weeping and grinding of teeth when you see Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and all the prophets in God's kingdom, but you yourselves will be thrown out. People will come from east and west, north and south, and sit down to eat in God's kingdom. Look, those who are last will be first, and those who are first will be last." At that time, some Pharisees approached Jesus and said, "Go, get away from here, because Herod wants to kill you." Jesus said to them, "Go tell that fox, look, I'm throwing out demons and healing people today and tomorrow, and on the third day I will complete my work. However, it's necessary for me to travel today, tomorrow, and the next day, because it's impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who stone the prophets, and you who kill the prophets and stone those who are sent to you. How often I have wanted to gather your people, just as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you didn't want that. Look, your house is abandoned. I tell you, you won't see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessings on the one who comes in the Lord's name.'" One Sabbath, Jesus went to share a meal in the home of one of the leaders of the Pharisees. They were watching him closely. A man suffering from an abnormal swelling of the body was there. Jesus said to them, Jesus asked the lawyers and Pharisees, "Does the law allow healing on the Sabbath or not?" But they said nothing. Jesus took hold of the man, cured him, and then let him go. He said to them, "Suppose your child or ox fell into a ditch on the Sabbath day. Wouldn't you immediately pull it out?" But they had no response. When Jesus noticed how the guests sought out the best seats at the table, He told them a parable. When someone invites you to a wedding celebration, don't take your seat in the place of honor. Someone more highly regarded than you could have been invited by your host. The host who invited both of you will come and say to you, give your seat to this other person. Embarrassed, you'll take your seat in the least important place. Instead, when you receive an invitation, go and sit in the least important place. When your host approaches you, he will say, friend, move up here to a better spot. Then you will be honored in the presence of all your fellow guests. All who lift themselves up will be brought low, and those who make themselves low will be lifted up. Then Jesus said to the person who had invited him, when you host a lunch or dinner, don't invite your friends, your brothers and sisters, your relatives, or rich neighbors. If you do, they will invite you in return, and that will be your reward. Instead, when you give a banquet, invite the poor, crippled, lame, and blind, and you will be blessed because they can't repay you. Instead, you will be repaid when the just are resurrected. When one of the dinner guests heard Jesus' response, he said to Jesus, happy are those who will feast in God's kingdom. Jesus replied, a certain man hosted a large dinner and invited many people. When it was time for the dinner to begin, he sent his servant to tell the invited guests, come, the dinner is now ready. One by one, they all began to make excuses. The first one told him, I bought a farm and must go and see it. Please excuse me. Another said, I bought 5 teams of oxen. I'm going to check on them. Please excuse me. Another said, I just got married, so I can't come. When the servant returned, he reported these excuses to his master. The master of the house became angry and said to his servant, go quickly to the city streets, the busy ones in the side streets, and bring the poor, crippled, blind, and lame. The servant said, Master, your instructions have been followed, and there is still room. The master said to the servant, go to the highways and back alleys and urge people to come in so that my house will be filled. I assure you that not one of those who are invited will taste my dinner. Large crowds were traveling with Jesus. Turning to them, he said, whoever comes to me and doesn't hate father and mother, spouse and children, and brothers and sisters, yes, even one's own life, cannot be my disciple. Whoever doesn't carry their own cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. If one of you wanted to build a tower, wouldn't you first sit down and calculate whether you had enough money to complete it? Otherwise, when you have laid the foundation but couldn't finish the tower, all who see it will begin to belittle you. They will say, here's the person who began construction and couldn't complete it. Or what king would go to war against another king without first sitting down to consider whether his 10,000 soldiers could go up against the 20,000 coming against him? And if he didn't think he could win, he would send a representative to discuss terms of peace while his enemy was still a long way off. In the same way, none of you are unwilling to give up all your possessions can be my disciple. Salt is good, but if salt loses its flavor, how can it become salty again? It has no value neither for the soil nor for the manure pile. People throw it away. Whoever has ears to hear, let him pay attention. All the tax collectors and sinners were gathering around Jesus to listen to him. The Pharisees and legal experts were grumbling, saying, this man welcomes sinners and eats with him. Jesus told them a parable. Suppose someone among you had 100 sheep and lost one of them. Wouldn't he leave the other 99 in the pasture and search for the lost one until he finds it? And when he finds it, he is thrilled and places it on his shoulders. When he arrives home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, celebrate with me because I've found my lost sheep. In the same way, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who changes both heart and life than over 99 righteous people who have no need to change their hearts and lives. Or what woman, if she owns 10 silver coins and loses one of them, won't light a lamp and sweep her house, searching her home carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, celebrate with me because I found my lost coin. In the same way, I tell you, joy breaks out in the presence of God's angels over one sinner who changes both heart and life. Jesus said, a certain man had 2 sons. The younger son said to his father, Father, give me my share of the inheritance. Then the father divided his estate between them. Soon afterward, the younger son gathered everything together and went on a trip. Soon afterward, the younger son gathered everything together and took a trip to a land far away. There he wasted his wealth through extravagant living. When he had used up his resources, a severe food shortage arose in that country, and he began to be in need. He hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his field to feed pigs. He longed to eat his fill from what the pigs ate, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said to himself, How many of my father's hired hands have more than enough food, but I'm starving to death? I will get up and go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Take me on as one of your hired hands. So he got up and went to his father. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was moved with compassion. His father ran to him, hugged him, and kissed him. Then his son said, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Quickly, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Fetch the fattened calf and slaughter it. We must celebrate with feasting, because this son of mine was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and is found, and they began to celebrate. Now the older son was in the field. Coming in from the field, he approached the house and heard music and dancing. He called one of the servants and asked what was happening. The servant replied, Your brother has arrived, and your father has slaughtered the fattened calf because he received his son back safe and sound. Then the older son was furious and didn't want to enter in, but his father came out and begged him. He answered his father, Look, I've served you all these years, and I never disobeyed your instructions. Yet you've never given me as much as a young goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours returned after gobbling up your estate on prostitutes, you slaughtered the fattened calf for him. Then his father said, Son, you're always with me, and everything I have is yours, but we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and has come back, is alive. He was lost and is found. Jesus also said to the disciples, a certain rich man heard that his household manager was wasting his estate. A certain rich man heard that his household manager was wasting his estate. He called the manager in and said, What's this I hear about you? Give me a report of your administration, because you can no longer serve as my manager. The household manager said to himself, What will I do now that my master is firing me as his manager? I'm not strong enough to dig and too proud to beg. Then he thought, and too proud to beg. Then he thought, I know what I'll do. I'm just not strong enough to dig and too proud to beg. I know what I'll do. Then he thought, I know what I'll do. Now that my master is firing me as his manager, one by one. No, I know what I'll do so that when I'm removed from my management position, people will welcome me into their homes. One by one, the manager sent for each person who owed his master money. He said to the first, How much do you owe? He said, 900 gallons of olive oil. The manager said to him, Take your contract, sit down quickly, and write 450 gallons. Dobby, come, crate. Then the manager said to another, How much do you owe? He said, 1,000 bushels of wheat. He said, Take your contract and write 800. The master commended the dishonest manager because he acted cleverly. People who belong to this world are more clever in dealing with their peers than are people who belong to the light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to make friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you'll be welcomed into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful with a little is also faithful with much. And the one who is dishonest with little is also dishonest with much. If you haven't been faithful with worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? If you haven't been faithful with someone else's property, who will give you your own? No household servant can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be loyal to the one and have contempt for the other. You cannot serve God and money. You cannot serve God and wealth. The Pharisees, who were money lovers, heard all this and sneered at Jesus. Jesus said to them, "You are the ones who justify yourselves before people, but God knows your hearts. What is highly valued by people is deeply offensive to God. Until John, there was only the law and the prophets. Since then, the good news of God's kingdom is being preached, and everyone is urged to enter it." And everyone is urged to enter it. It's easier for heaven and earth to pass away than for the smallest stroke of a pen in the law to drop out. Any man who divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery, and a man who marries a woman divorced from her husband commits adultery. There was a certain rich man who clothed himself in purple and fine linen, and who feasted luxuriously every day. At his gate lay a certain poor man named Lazarus, who was covered with sores. Lazarus longed to eat the crumbs that fell from the rich man's table, but no one gave him anything. The poor man died and was carried by angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. While being tormented in the place of the dead, the rich man looked up and saw Abraham at a distance with Lazarus at his side. While being tormented in the place of the dead, he looked up and saw Abraham at a distance with Lazarus at his side. He shouted, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me. Send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I'm suffering in this flame." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received good things, whereas Lazarus received terrible things. Now Lazarus is being comforted, and you are in great pain. Moreover, a great crevasse has been fixed between us and you. Those who wish to cross over from here to you cannot, neither can anyone cross from there to us." The rich man said, "Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my father's house. I have 5 brothers. He needs to warn them so that they don't come to this place of agony." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. They must listen to them." The rich man said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone from the dead goes to them, then they will change their hearts and lives." Abraham said, "If they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded if someone rises from the dead." Jesus said to his disciples, "Things that cause people to trip and fall into sin must happen. But how terrible it is for the person through whom they happen. It would be better for them to be thrown into a lake with a large stone hung around their necks than to cause one of these little ones to trip and fall into sin. Watch yourselves. If your brother or sister sins, warn them to stop. If they change their hearts and lives, forgive them. Even if someone comes to you 7 times in one day and returns to you 7 times and says, 'I'm changing my ways,' you must forgive that person." The apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." The Lord replied, "If you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you. Would any of you say to your servant who had just come in after plowing from the field after plowing or tending sheep, 'Come, sit down for dinner'? Wouldn't you say instead, 'Fix my dinner, put on the clothes of a table servant, and wait on me while I eat and drink. After that you can eat and drink'? You won't thank the servant because the servant did what you asked, will you? In the same way, when you have done everything required of you, you should say, 'We servants deserve no special praise. we've only done our duty. Jesus traveled along the border between, on the way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he entered a village, 10 men with skin diseases approached him. Keeping their distance from him, they raised their voices and said, "Jesus, Master, show us mercy." When he saw them, the Lord, when Jesus saw them, he said, "Go, show yourselves to the priests." As they left, they were cleansed. One of them, when he saw that he had been cleansed, returned and praised God with a loud voice. He fell on his face at Jesus' feet and thanked him. He was a Samaritan. Jesus replied, "Weren't 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? No one has returned to praise God except this foreigner?" Then Jesus said to him, "Get up and go. Your faith has healed you." Pharisees asked Jesus when God's kingdom was coming. Jesus said to them, "God's kingdom isn't coming with signs that are easily noticed, nor will people say, 'Look, here it is,' or 'There it is.' Don't you see? God's kingdom is already among you." Then Jesus said to the disciples, "The time will come when you will long to see one of the days of the human one, and you won't see it. People will say to you, 'Look here,' or 'Look there,' 'Look here.' Don't leave or go chasing after them. The human one will appear on his day in the same way that a flash of lightning lights up the sky from one end to the other. However, first he must suffer many things and be rejected by this generation. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be during the days of the human one. People were eating, drinking, buying, selling, planting, and building. But on the day Noah entered the ark, the flood came and destroyed them all. Sorry. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the days of the human one. People were eating, drinking, marrying, and being given in marriage. But on the day Noah entered the ark, the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise, in the days of Lot, people were eating, drinking, buying, selling, planting, and building. But on the day Lot left Sodom, fire, sulfur rained down from heaven and destroyed them all. That's the way it will be on the day the human one is revealed. Hush! People on that day, those on the roof whose possessions are in the house shouldn't come down to grab them. Likewise, those in the field shouldn't turn back. Remember Lot's wife? Whoever tries to preserve their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life will preserve it. I tell you, on that night, 2 people will be in the same bed. One will be taken and the other left. 2 women will be grinding grain together. One will be taken and the other left. The disciples asked, "Where, Lord?" Jesus replied, "The vultures gather wherever there's a dead body." Jesus was telling them a parable about their need to pray continuously and not to be discouraged. He said, in a certain city, there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected people. In that city, there was a widow who kept coming to him asking, "Give me justice in this case against my adversary." For a while he refused, but finally said to himself, "I don't fear God or respect people, but I will give this woman justice because she keeps bothering me. Otherwise, there will be no end to her coming here and embarrassing me." The Lord said, "Listen to what the unjust judge says. Won't God provide justice to his chosen people who cry out to him day and night? Will he be slow to help them? I tell you, he will give them justice quickly. But when the human one comes, will he find faithfulness on the earth?" Jesus told this parable to certain people who had convinced themselves that they were righteous and who looked on everyone else with disgust. 2 people went up to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed about himself with these words: "God, I thank you that I'm not like other people, crooks, evildoers, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week and I give 1/10 of everything I receive." But the tax collector stood at a distance. He wouldn't even lift his eyes to look toward heaven. Rather, he struck his chest and said, "God, show mercy to me, a sinner." I tell you that this person went down to his home justified rather than the Pharisee.
All who lift themselves up will be brought low, and those who make themselves low will be lifted up. People were bringing babies to Jesus so that he would bless them. When the disciples saw this, they scolded them. Then Jesus called them to him and said, "Allow the children to come to me, don't forbid them, because God's kingdom belongs to people like these children. I assure you that anyone who doesn't welcome God's kingdom like a child will never enter it." A certain ruler asked Jesus, "Good teacher, what must I do to obtain eternal life?" Jesus replied, "Why do you call me good? No one is good except the one God. You know the commandments. Don't commit adultery, don't murder, don't steal, don't give false testimony, honor your father and mother." Then the ruler said, "I've kept all of these things since I was a boy." When Jesus heard this, he said, "There's one more thing. Go and sell everything you own and distribute the money to the poor. Then you'll have treasure in heaven. And come follow me." When he heard this, the man became sad because when he heard these words, the man became sad because he was extremely rich. When Jesus saw this, he said, "It's very hard for the wealthy to enter God's kingdom. It's easier for a camel to enter through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter God's kingdom." Those who heard this said, "Then who can be saved?" Jesus replied, "What is impossible for humans is possible for God." Peter said, "Look, we left everything we own and followed you." Jesus said to them, "I assure you that anyone who has left house, husband, wife, brothers, sisters, parents, or children because of God's kingdom will receive many times more in this age and eternal life in the coming age." Jesus took the 12 aside and said, "Look, we're going up to Jerusalem, and everything written about the human one, everything written about the human one, everything written about the prophets, everything written by the prophets about the human one will be accomplished. He will be handed over to the Gentiles. He will be ridiculed, mistreated, and spit on. After torturing him, they will kill him. On the third day, he will rise up." But the 12 understood none of these words. The meaning of this message was hidden from them, so they couldn't grasp it. I'm not sure, I might be wrong. I confused that with the other saying a lot like that in chapter, I want to say, I don't know, 11 or 12 or 10, 9, in chapter 9. Forget it. Anyway, I confused that with chapter 9's very similar saying. As Jesus came to Jericho, a certain blind man was sitting beside the road begging. When Jesus saw, a certain blind man was sitting beside the road begging. When the man heard the crowd passing by, he asked what was happening. They told him, "Jesus the Nazarene is passing by." The blind man shouted, "Jesus, Son of David, show me mercy." Those leading the procession scolded him, telling him to be quiet. But he shouted even louder, "Son of David, show me mercy." Jesus stopped and called for the man to be brought to him. When he was present, Jesus asked, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said, "Lord, I want to see." Jesus said to him, "Receive your sight, your faith has healed you." Right away, at once he was able to see, and he began to follow Jesus, praising God. When all the people saw this, they praised God too.